Thousands of employees stand frozen inside the glass lobby of one of the country's largest technology companies. Luxury cars line the entrance. News cameras crowd the front steps. Everyone is whispering the same name: Vivienne Ashford, the billionaire who rarely appeared in public. She walks through the lobby in a tailored black suit, every executive scrambling to greet her. But she ignores them all. Instead, she walks straight toward a single software engineer carrying nothing more than a backpack and a takeaway coffee. The entire building falls silent. She stops in front of him, looks directly into his eyes, then calmly says, "Marry me." The coffee slips from his hand. Employees stare in disbelief. Someone quietly mutters, "Does she even know who he is?" Adrian doesn't smile. He doesn't panic. He simply looks at the woman who shattered his heart 3 years ago and answers with one sentence, "I'd rather stay poor." Silent. Vivienne studies him for several long seconds. Then the corners of her lips lift into the faintest smile. "We'll see about that." She turns and walks away. No anger, no argument, no explanation, leaving behind a lobby full of stunned witnesses. And one question that no one can answer: why would the richest woman in the country ask an ordinary man to marry her after he clearly hated her? 3 years earlier, the lobby of Orion Technologies had never been this quiet. Not because something had gone wrong, but because someone impossible had just walked through the front doors. Conversations stopped. Keyboards fell silent. Even the security guards straightened their backs. Every pair of eyes followed the same woman, Vivienne Ashford, the youngest billionaire CEO in the country. A woman whose signature could change stock markets before lunch and destroy companies before dinner. She wasn't supposed to be here. Executives rushed forward with nervous smiles. "Miss Ashford, we weren't informed you'd be visiting today. We've already prepared the boardroom. Our CEO is waiting upstairs." She didn't even slow down. Without acknowledging a single executive, she continued walking through the center of the lobby. Her heels echoed across the polished marble floor. Each step seemed louder than the last, because everyone was wondering the same thing. Who could possibly be important enough for Vivienne Ashford to ignore an entire executive board? Meanwhile, Adrian Cross stepped through the revolving doors carrying a worn backpack over one shoulder and a paper cup of coffee in his hand. "Just another Monday." He nodded politely at the receptionist, completely unaware that nearly 200 pairs of eyes had suddenly shifted toward him. He noticed the silence, raised an eyebrow, then looked up, and froze. Standing only a few steps away was the woman he'd spent 3 years trying to forget. Vivienne. She hadn't changed. No, that wasn't true. She had become everything she'd once dreamed of. Perfectly tailored black suit, diamond earrings that caught the morning light, the quiet confidence of someone who owned every room she entered. For a brief moment, their eyes met. The entire lobby disappeared. No employees, no cameras, no passing years. Just two people standing in the ruins of a love neither of them had buried. Vivienne took one step closer, then another. She stopped so close that only the sound of Adrian's breathing remained. The receptionist nervously whispered, "Do they know each other?" No one answered. Vivienne looked directly into Adrian's eyes. Her expression never changed. Then she spoke, calmly, almost gently, "Marry me." The paper coffee cup slipped from Adrian's fingers. It struck the marble floor. Coffee spread across the polished tiles. No one moved. One employee blinked twice. Another quietly muttered, Did she just propose?" Someone else whispered, "To him." Phones slowly disappeared beneath desks as people secretly started recording. Across the lobby, an intern leaned toward her manager. "Who is that guy?" The manager swallowed. "I have no idea." Adrian finally found his voice. A humorless laugh escaped him. He looked at the woman who had shattered his heart 3 years earlier. The woman who had disappeared without looking back. The woman who now stood before him as if nothing had happened. He shook his head. Once, slowly, then said the words no one in that lobby expected. I'd rather stay poor. The sentence landed harder than a slap. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Someone actually dropped a tablet. One executive looked physically ill. No one had ever spoken to Vivienne Ashford like that. For the first time, a faint emotion flickered across Vivienne's face. Not anger, not embarrassment, something much quieter, something that hurt. It vanished almost instantly. She took one slow breath. Then the corner of her lips lifted into the smallest smile. A smile Adrian remembered all too well. We'll see about that. She turned, walked back toward the entrance. Every employee instinctively stepped aside. No one dared stop her. No one dared speak. The lobby remained frozen until the doors closed behind her. Only then did the room explode into whispers. Who is he? Why would she propose to him? Why did he reject her? Adrian didn't answer a single question. He simply stared at the coffee soaking into the marble floor. 3 years ago, she had walked out of his life without an explanation. Today, she had walked back into it with a proposal. And somehow, that terrified him even more. The morning after Vivienne Ashford's impossible proposal, Orion Technologies no longer belonged to Orion Technologies. At exactly 9 o'clock, every employee received the same email. Urgent mandatory all H&S meeting. No explanation, no agenda, just one sentence. Attendance is compulsory. Within minutes, more than 600 employees filled the company's main auditorium. Whispers spread through every row. Did we lose a client? Is the company in trouble? Why is everyone here? Adrian Cross sat near the back with his backpack resting beside his chair. He wasn't worried. He thought it was just another company announcement. Then the CEO walked onto the stage. Normally confident and full of energy. Today, his hands trembled around the microphone. He forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us on such short notice. He took a slow breath. As of this morning, Orion Technologies has officially been acquired. The room exploded. What? Impossible. Who bought us? The CEO raised a hand, asking everyone to calm down. Our new owner would like to address everyone personally. The lights dimmed. The giant screen behind him lit up. A familiar logo slowly appeared. ASHFORD Global Holdings. Every conversation stopped. Adrian's face stiffened. The screen switched to a live broadcast. Vivienne Ashford appeared, wearing a perfectly tailored black suit. Calm, elegant, untouchable. She looked directly into the camera. Good morning, everyone. From today onward, Orion Technologies officially joins Ashford Global Holdings. The auditorium erupted into applause. Employees exchanged excited smiles. That's incredible. Our jobs are safe. I heard she doubles every company's value. We just won the lottery. Vivienne waited patiently for the applause to fade. I want everyone here to know. There will be no layoffs. More applause. No salary reductions. The cheers grew even louder. In fact, every employee will receive a significant increase in salary and benefits. Some employees actually stood to applaud. A few wiped away tears of relief. Then, Vivienne spoke one final sentence. I have only one condition. The auditorium instantly fell silent. She continued. One employee must remain with this company. The HR director stepped toward the microphone. Ms. Ashford, May we know who? Vivienne answered without the slightest hesitation. Adrian Cross. Silence. Hundreds of heads slowly turned. Every eye landed on Adrian. Someone whispered, "That's him. The guy from yesterday." So they really know each other. The CEO looked directly at Adrian. "Mr. Cross, it seems Miss Ashford would like to speak with you after the meeting." Adrian slowly stood up. The entire auditorium watched him. He walked down the aisle, step by step. Everyone expected him to approach the stage. Instead, he walked straight toward the exit. The CEO called after him, "Adrian." He didn't stop. The HR director hurried after him. "Wait, do you understand what this means?" Adrian finally stopped outside the auditorium doors. He looked back. Yesterday, she had asked him to marry her. Today, she had bought the company where he worked. He reached into his pocket, removed his employee identification card, placed it into the HR director's hand. "I resigned." The HR director stared at him in disbelief. "You what? You've just been personally selected by the richest CEO in the country." Adrian gave a tired smile. "And that's exactly why I'm leaving." He adjusted the strap of his backpack. "She can buy companies." He looked toward the enormous Ashford Global logo displayed across the building's screen. "But she doesn't get to buy me." Without another word, he walked away. High above the city, inside the executive office of Ashford Global Holdings, Vivienne watched the live security feed in complete silence. One of her executives carefully approached. "Miss Ashford." He resigned. The room became deathly quiet. No one dared speak. Vivienne stared at the screen for several long seconds, then quietly whispered, "You're still running from me." She closed the live feed, turned toward her executive team. Her expression became cold once again. "Find out where Adrian Cross applies next." One executive nodded. "We'll prepare an offer." Vivienne slowly shook her head. A faint smile appeared on her lips. "No." A long silence filled the room. Then she delivered the sentence that made every executive exchange nervous glances. "Buy it before he gets there." Adrian thought resigning from Orion Technologies would finally put an end to Vivienne Ashford's games. He couldn't have been more wrong. The following morning, his phone rang before sunrise. It was Daniel, his closest friend since university. "Good news. I found you an interview." Adrian smiled for the first time in 2 days. "You work fast. I owe you one." Daniel laughed. "Don't thank me yet. They're one of the fastest growing AI companies in the city. The salary's even better than Orion." Adrian looked out the apartment window. Maybe, just maybe, life was finally moving forward again. An hour later, Adrian walked into Novamind Technologies. The lobby was modern, bright, filled with young engineers discussing ideas over coffee. It felt hopeful. The receptionist smiled warmly. "Mr. Cross, the hiring manager is waiting for you." Everything about the place felt right. As he stepped into the interview room, 3 interviewers stood to greet him. One of them smiled. "We've been looking forward to meeting you." For nearly an hour, the interview went perfectly. Technical questions, problem solving, future plans. Every answer seemed to impress them. Finally, the department director leaned back in his chair. "I don't think we need another interview." He extended his hand. "Welcome to Novamind." Adrian smiled. Relief washed over him. After everything, he had found another chance. Just as he reached for the offer letter, someone knocked on the conference room door. The HR manager stepped inside. Her expression had completely changed. "I'm sorry." The director frowned. "What happened?" She swallowed. We've just received notice. The acquisition was completed 20 minutes ago. Everyone in the room looked confused. What acquisition? The HR manager looked directly at Adrian. Ashford Global has purchased Novamind Technologies. Silence. The offer letter slowly slipped from Adrian's hand. No, not again. The director looked stunned. We weren't informed. It happened this morning. The HR manager hesitated. There's also one additional instruction. Nobody spoke. She quietly read the email. Mr. Adrian Cross, your recruitment process has been cancelled. Adrian stood motionless. The room felt smaller. His chest tightened. The director looked genuinely embarrassed. I'm so sorry. We had no idea. Adrian didn't answer. He simply turned and walked out. Outside the building, rain had begun to fall. Adrian stood beneath the entrance canopy. His phone vibrated. One message. Unknown number. He opened it. There were only 8 words. You deserve a better future than this. No signature. No explanation. He didn't need either. He deleted the message immediately. That evening, Daniel arrived carrying takeaway food. He placed it on the kitchen table. I heard what happened. Adrian remained silent. Daniel sat opposite him. This can't be a coincidence anymore. Adrian let out a bitter laugh. No, it isn't. Daniel hesitated. Who exactly is Vivienne Ashford to you? Adrian stared at the untouched food. After a long silence, he finally answered. My biggest mistake. Daniel frowned. You don't sound angry. Adrian slowly looked up. I was. No, I just want her to leave me alone. Across the city, the top floor of Ashford Global remained brightly lit despite the late hour. Stacks of acquisition reports covered Vivienne's desk. An executive stepped inside. Ms. Ashford, Novamind acquisition completed successfully. She nodded without looking up. And Adrian. He left. For the first time that day. She stopped working. Her fingers tightened around the pen in her hand. He still refused. Yes. The executive hesitated. If I may ask, why not simply offer him anything he wants? A higher salary, company shares, a senior position. You could make him richer than most CEOs overnight. Vivienne slowly stood and walked toward the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Her reflection stared back at her. Quiet, lonely, she finally answered. If money were enough, he would have stayed with me 3 years ago. The executive didn't understand. Neither did the audience. Not yet. Meanwhile, Adrian sat alone on the rooftop of his apartment building. The city lights stretched endlessly before him. He clenched his fist. If she wants to block every road. He stood. His eyes hardened with determination. Then I'll stop walking roads other people built. I'll build my own. For the first time since rejecting Vivienne, he had a new goal. He wouldn't look for another job. He would create his own company. A future that no one, not even the richest woman in the country, could ever buy. Unfortunately, Adrian had forgotten one thing. To build a company, you first needed investors. And somewhere across the city, Vivienne Ashford already knew exactly who they were. 3 days later, Adrian stood in front of a small whiteboard inside Daniel's apartment. The room was barely large enough for 2 desks. Empty pizza boxes covered one corner. Laptops, notebooks, and tangled charging cables filled the other. It wasn't much, but to Adrian, it felt like freedom. He uncapped a marker and wrote 3 words across the whiteboard. Project Phoenix. Daniel leaned back in his chair. So, we're really doing this? Adrian nodded. If every company belongs to her, I'll build one that doesn't. Daniel laughed. I missed this version of you. For a second, I thought she'd actually broken you. Adrian smiled. Oh, she did. He looked at the words on the whiteboard. I'm just rebuilding differently. For the next several weeks, they barely slept. Days became nights. Nights became mornings. They coded until sunrise, lived on instant noodles, argued over software designs, celebrated tiny victories with cheap takeaway coffee. There were no billion-pound offices, no expensive furniture, no investors, just two friends, trying to build something that mattered. One afternoon, Daniel burst through the apartment door holding a folder. His face was glowing. We got one. Adrian looked up from his laptop. What? An investor. A real one. Adrian stood so quickly his chair nearly fell over. Are you serious? Daniel nodded excitedly. They loved the prototype. They want to meet us tomorrow. For the first time in weeks. Hope returned. The next afternoon, they entered one of the city's largest investment firms. The meeting lasted almost 2 hours. The investors loved everything. Your vision, your technology, your business model. One of them smiled. I think we can build something extraordinary together. He extended a contract across the table. We'd like to invest. Adrian stared at the document. Months of sacrifice, finally paying off. He picked up the pen. Then, the conference room door opened. A young assistant hurried inside. I'm terribly sorry for interrupting. The lead investor frowned. What is it? She whispered something into his ear. The color drained from his face. When? 5 minutes ago. The room fell silent. The investor slowly removed the contract from Adrian's hands. I'm sorry. Adrian frowned. What happened? The investor let out a long breath. Our investment group has just been acquired. Adrian already knew the answer. He just didn't want to hear it. By Ashford Global. The investor lowered his eyes. Yes. Nobody spoke. The silence felt endless. Finally, Adrian laughed. Not because anything was funny, but because reality had become absurd. He stood, buttoned his jacket, extended his hand. No hard feelings. The investor looked ashamed. I truly wanted to work with you. I know. Adrian smiled politely. But somebody wanted me more. He turned and walked away. Outside, Daniel finally exploded. This is insane. She bought an investment company. Who does that? Adrian looked across the street, where an enormous digital billboard displayed Ashford Global's newest acquisition. He couldn't help laughing again. A tired, defeated laugh. I don't think she bought the company. Daniel frowned. What do you mean? Adrian looked at the billboard. I think she bought my future. That night, Ashford Tower, the executive boardroom. One director nervously placed another report on Vivienne's desk. Project Phoenix failed to secure funding. She nodded once. What about Adrian? He left without causing any trouble. Vivienne closed the file. He still refuses to ask me for help. He'd rather lose. A faint sadness crossed her face. She whispered. He'd rather lose to the world than win because of me. The directors exchanged uneasy glances. None of them had ever seen their CEO speak with such quiet regret. Hours later, Adrian sat alone inside the tiny apartment office. The whiteboard still read, Project Phoenix. He stared at it for a long time, then quietly picked up the eraser. Daniel stopped him. What are you doing? Adrian didn't answer. He simply erased one word. Project. Leaving only. Phoenix. Daniel looked confused. Adrian placed the marker down. If a phoenix is real, it doesn't rise because someone saves it. It rises because it burns first. He looked toward the city skyline, toward the tallest building in the distance, Ashford Tower. His eyes no longer held frustration, only determination. You can keep buying every road I try to take. I'll become the destination. The following morning, Vivienne stood inside her office overlooking the city. Her assistant entered quietly. Miss Ashford, Adrian Cross has stopped applying for jobs. Vivienne slowly looked up. What is he doing? The assistant hesitated. He's building his own company. For the first time, Vivienne smiled, not because she had won, but because she finally recognized the man she had fallen in love with. She looked out across the skyline, then softly whispered to herself, "Oh good, I was hoping you'd stop running and start fighting." She picked up her phone, dialed a number. The call connected immediately. Cancel every acquisition scheduled for today. The executive sounded surprised. May I ask why? Vivienne's eyes remained fixed on the horizon. Because a small smile appeared on her lips. The game has finally become interesting. For the first time, Vivienne Ashford stopped making moves. No new acquisitions. No surprise buyouts. No mysterious phone calls. The silence was almost unsettling. 3 weeks passed. Then 6. Daniel leaned back in his chair and smiled. I think she finally gave up. Adrian didn't answer. He simply continued typing. Project Phoenix was finally taking shape. The prototype worked. Their first beta users loved it. For the first time since resigning, the future actually looked promising. One Friday afternoon, Adrian's phone rang. An unknown number. He almost ignored it. Almost. Mr. Cross. This is Sophia Bennett from Horizon Ventures. Adrian frowned. Horizon Ventures. Yes. We've been following Project Phoenix. We'd like to discuss a potential investment. Adrian looked at Daniel. His eyes widened. Another investor. This one hadn't been bought. At least, not yet. The meeting took place the following Monday. Unlike the previous investors, Horizon Ventures occupied only one floor of a modest office building. No luxury, no marble lobby, no expensive artwork. Just people who genuinely love technology. Sophia greeted Adrian with a warm smile. I've read every page of your proposal. I like founders who solve problems instead of chasing trends. For 2 hours, they talked about ideas, innovation, the future. Not once did anyone mention Vivienne Ashford. When the meeting ended, Sophia stood and extended her hand. I'd like Horizon Ventures to become your first investor. Adrian smiled. For the first time in months, it felt real. That evening, Daniel was practically dancing around the apartment. We did it. I told you. There are still people money can't reach. Adrian laughed. I'll celebrate after the money's actually in our account. Daniel grinned. You're impossible. The following morning, Adrian walked into Horizon Ventures carrying the final contracts. Something felt wrong. The receptionist who had greeted him so warmly yesterday wouldn't look him in the eye. Employees whispered behind computer screens. Sophia stepped out of her office. She looked exhausted. I'm sorry. Adrian's smile faded. What happened? She held out the unsigned contract. Our board changed its decision. Adrian remained calm. Why? She hesitated, then answered honestly. Because someone offered to buy our entire investment portfolio for nearly 3 times its market value. Adrian didn't even ask. He already knew. Sophia lowered her voice. I refused. His eyes widened. But the board didn't. Silent. They voted. And I lost. Adrian slowly nodded. I understand. No. Sophia said quietly. You don't. She looked genuinely angry. I've worked in venture capital for 15 years. I've seen companies destroyed. I've seen founders betrayed. But I've never seen someone spend this much money just to stop one man from walking away. She looked directly into Adrian's eyes. Who are you to her? Adrian looked away. After a long silence, he answered, I honestly don't know anymore. Across the city, Vivienne stood alone in her office. Her assistant entered. Horizon Ventures has been acquired. Vivienne nodded. And Adrian. He left. Again. Her assistant finally gathered the courage to ask, Miss Ashford, why not simply tell him the truth? Vivienne remained silent. She walked to the window. The city stretched endlessly below. Finally, she answered, because if he only comes back, after knowing the truth, I'll spend the rest of my life wondering on whether he chose me or my guilt. That evening, Adrian returned to the apartment. Daniel was waiting. So, Adrian quietly placed the unsigned contract on the table. Daniel stared at it, then slowly sat down. Neither of them spoke. After several minutes, Daniel finally broke the silence. You know, I've been thinking. Adrian looked up. If she can buy every company, if she can buy every investor, if she can buy every opportunity. Daniel leaned forward. Maybe. That's exactly what she wants. Adrian frowned. What do you mean? Daniel took a deep breath. Maybe she's trying to force you into one place. So you'll have no choice. Accept her. The apartment became silent. Adrian slowly looked at the city lights outside the window. Could that really be it? No. He shook his head. Whatever game Vivienne was playing, he refused to surrender. He stood, picked up the Project Phoenix folder, then quietly said, I've been trying to outrun her. Daniel nodded. So, Adrian's eyes hardened. Tomorrow, I'm going to her. Daniel blinked. To accept her offer. Adrian slowly smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of someone walking into a battlefield. I'm going to end this. The next morning, for the first time in 3 years, Adrian Cross walked through the front doors of Ashford Global Headquarters. The receptionist froze. Employees whispered. Security guards straightened instantly. Within seconds, the entire building knew one thing. The only man who had ever rejected Vivienne Ashford had just come to see her. And on the top floor, Vivienne looked up as her office doors slowly opened. The doors to the executive floor opened with a soft chime. Every assistant immediately stood. Every conversation stopped. No one had ever seen Adrian Cross inside Ashford Global Headquarters. Not willingly, an executive hurried toward him. Mr. Cross, Miss Ashford is expecting you. Adrian frowned. She knew I was coming. The executive offered an awkward smile. She always knows. The office doors slowly opened. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the entire city. Vivienne stood with her back to the room. The skyline reflected across the glass. She didn't turn around immediately. I was beginning to think you'd never come. Adrian remained near the entrance. I didn't come because you won. She smiled faintly. I know. You came because you're angry. Silent. Finally, she turned to face him. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. 3 years, hundreds of sleepless nights, thousands of unanswered questions. Everything stood between them. Adrian broke the silence. What exactly do you want? Vivienne answered without hesitation. Are you? He laughed. A cold, bitter laugh. You've bought my company, my opportunities, my investors. What are you buying next? She quietly replied. Whatever keeps you from disappearing again. His patience finally snapped. He walked toward her desk. His fists clenched. You don't get to decide my future. You lost that right 3 years ago. For the first time, something inside Vivienne cracked. Just for a second. But Adrian saw it. She looked away. If shouting makes you feel better, then shout. I'll listen. Adrian stared at her. He had imagined this moment 1,000 times. He had imagined making her cry, making her regret everything, making her feel even a fraction of what he had felt. Instead, she simply stood there, quietly accepting every word. That somehow made him even angrier. You know what hurts the most? He asked. It wasn't that you left. It was how easily you left. You looked me in the eyes and acted like I meant nothing. Vivienne lowered her gaze. She didn't defend herself. She didn't argue. She simply whispered, I know. The silence stretched. Finally, Adrian reached into his backpack. He pulled out a folder. Project Phoenix. He placed it on her desk. You win. Vivienne looked at the folder, then back at Adrian. I'm listening. You've made it impossible for anyone to invest. So here's my offer. He looked directly into her eyes. You invest. The room became completely silent. Vivienne's expression softened. For the first time since entering, she looked hopeful. Then Adrian continued. But you'll own nothing. The hope vanished. You'll get no shares, no board seat, no control, no influence. You'll simply transfer the money, then walk away. Vivienne almost smiled. You know that's not how investments work. Adrian nodded. I know. I'm just making sure we're finally speaking the same language. She looked at him curiously. What language is that? Adrian answered without blinking. The language where not everything has a price. Vivienne slowly sat down. For several seconds, she said nothing. Then, she opened a drawer, removed a fountain pen, signed a check. She slid it across the desk. Adrian looked down. The amount made his heart stop. It was enough to fund Project Phoenix for years. He looked up. What do you want in return? Vivienne answered quietly. Nothing. He didn't touch it. I don't believe you. I know. She pushed the check a little closer. That's why I signed it before you asked. He picked it up, turned it over. No conditions. No contract. No hidden clause. Nothing. His eyes narrowed. What are you playing at? Vivienne looked at him. Not like a billionaire. Not like a CEO. Just like the woman who had once shared instant noodles with him at university. I'm tired, Adrian. The sentence was so quiet. He almost didn't hear it. She gave a small, exhausted smile. So very tired. Before Adrian could respond, a loud knock echoed through the office. The doors burst open. An elderly board member rushed inside. His face was pale. Miss Ashford, we have a serious problem. She frowned. What happened? The media found out. They're reporting every acquisition connected to Adrian Cross. They're calling it market manipulation. Our stock has dropped 11% since this morning. Another executive entered, followed by another. Everyone was talking at once. Shareholders are demanding answers. The board wants an emergency meeting. Several overseas investors are threatening to pull out. Adrian looked around the room. Confusion slowly replaced his anger. This wasn't the office of a woman winning. It was the office of someone quietly falling apart. Vivienne remained perfectly calm. She looked at her executives. "I'll handle it." "But," I said, "I'll handle it." One by one, the executives reluctantly left. The doors closed. Silence returned. Adrian looked at the check still resting in his hand. Then at Vivienne. For the first time, he noticed the dark circles beneath her eyes, the untouched cup of coffee on her desk, the pile of unopened meals stacked in one corner. She hadn't been living. She'd been surviving. Still, he hardened his heart. None of that changed what she had done. He placed the check back on her desk. "I don't want your money." Vivienne didn't try to stop him. He turned and walked toward the door. Just before leaving, he paused. Without looking back, he quietly said, "If you really want to help me, stop buying pieces of my life." The door closed behind him. Vivienne remained standing in the empty office. She looked at the unsigned check, then out at the city below. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to whisper the truth. Not to Adrian, not to her board, only to the empty room. "I never wanted to buy your future. I just didn't know how to be part of it anymore." Outside the office, Adrian stepped into the elevator. He closed his eyes. He had come here expecting to face a woman who could control everything. Instead, he had met someone carrying a burden he still couldn't understand. And for the first time since she walked back into his life, one question refused to leave his mind. What happened to Vivienne Ashford 3 years ago? Adrian didn't go home after leaving Ashford Global. He drove aimlessly through the city. For the first time in 3 years, his anger wasn't as clear as it used to be. Something about Vivienne's office refused to leave his mind. The untouched meals, the sleepless eyes, the executives panicking around her, the check with no conditions attached. It didn't fit the woman he believed he knew. It didn't fit the woman he hated. 3 days passed. Neither of them contacted the other. No companies were bought. No investors disappeared. No anonymous messages arrived. The silence felt wrong. Daniel noticed it too. She stopped. Adrian looked up from his laptop. "What?" "Everything. No acquisitions. No interference. Nothing." Adrian frowned. That wasn't like Vivienne. That evening, Ashford Global announced an emergency press conference. Every major news channel carried it live. Reporters expected a response to the recent acquisitions. Shareholders expected reassurance. The business world expected another cold, calculated performance from the Iron Queen. Instead, Vivienne stepped onto the stage looking more exhausted than anyone had ever seen her. Camera flashes lit up the room. A reporter shouted, "Ms. Ashford, did you manipulate multiple acquisitions to target one individual?" Another yelled, "Are you abusing shareholder funds? Has Ashford Global become your personal playground?" The questions came one after another. Vivienne remained silent until the room finally settled. Then she spoke. "I accept full responsibility." The room fell silent. Every acquisition, every financial decision, every consequence was my decision. Gasps echoed across the room. One board member nearly stood up in protest. She continued, "No employee of Ashford Global acted without my direct approval. If legal action follows, it should begin with me." Back inside his apartment, Adrian watched the broadcast in complete silence. Daniel looked at him. "She's protecting everyone." Adrian didn't answer. The following morning, Ashford Global's board of directors held an emergency meeting. Vivienne entered the boardroom alone. The atmosphere was ice cold. One director slid a thick folder across the table. We've calculated the damage. Another adjusted his glasses. Our shareholders have lost confidence. A third director looked at her without sympathy. You built this company into an empire, and now you've risked it. For one man, Vivienne remained calm. As I know, the chairman folded his hands. There is only one way to restore confidence. She already knew what was coming. You'll resign as CEO. The room became silent. Years of sacrifice. Years of impossible decisions. Everything reduced to one sentence. Vivienne slowly removed the company badge from her blazer. Placed it gently on the table. I understand. No argument. No negotiation. No fight. She stood, bowed politely, then walked out of the boardroom. Without looking back. That afternoon, news spread across every television channel. Breaking news. Vivienne EX Said as CEO of EX Global. Adrian stared at the screen. He couldn't believe it. Daniel whispered, "She just gave up everything." Hours later, Adrian received an unexpected visitor. An elderly man stood outside his apartment. Perfectly dressed, walking with a polished wooden cane. His face carried the weight of countless sleepless nights. "Mr. Adrian Cross." Adrian nodded cautiously. "Who are you?" The old man lowered his head. "My name is Edward Collins. I served the Ashford family for over 30 years. I was Miss Vivienne's grandfather's personal secretary." Adrian frowned. "I think you've got the wrong address." Edward shook his head. "No, I've come because Miss Vivienne never will." He reached into his leather briefcase, carefully removing a worn envelope. The paper had yellowed with age. The edges were creased from being opened and closed too many times. He handed it to Adrian. "What is this?" Edward looked away. "The letter. You were supposed to receive it." 3 years ago. Adrian's hands froze. "What?" Edward closed his eyes. "The day Miss Vivienne ended your relationship. She wrote that letter. She begged me to deliver it. So why didn't you?" Edward's voice trembled. "Because her grandfather found out. He ordered me to destroy it. I obeyed." A long silence followed. "I've regretted that decision every single day since." Adrian looked down at the unopened envelope. His heartbeat quickened. Edward quietly continued. "You deserve to know the truth. Not because it will erase your pain, but because you've been hating the wrong version of her." Adrian slowly opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter. The ink had faded slightly with time. He recognized the handwriting instantly. Vivienne's. His hands began to shake. He started reading. "Adrian, if you're reading this, then I was too weak to tell you these words myself. Today my grandfather gave me a choice. Save my family's company, or spend the rest of my life with you. If the company falls, thousands of families lose everything. Their children, their homes, their futures. I told myself I could save them first, and come back to you later. I convinced myself love could wait. I was wrong. If one day you hate me, please hate the woman who walked away, not the woman who loved you, because she never left." The letter slipped from Adrian's hands. His knees gave way. He sank slowly onto the floor. Every memory, every sleepless night, every ounce of hatred collapsed beneath the weight of a truth he had never imagined. He remembered her cold eyes, her harsh words, the way she had told him, "Love doesn't pay the bills." For 3 years, he believed those words were the truth. Now, he finally understood. They had been the biggest lie she had ever forced herself to tell. Edward quietly placed one final item on the table. A faded photograph. It showed two university students sitting on an old wooden bench beside a lake, both of them smiling. Edward looked at Adrian one last time. She became a billionaire, but she never became happy. He turned and walked toward the door. Just before leaving, he paused. "There's one more thing you should know." Adrian slowly looked up. Edward's eyes filled with sadness. Miss Vivienne didn't resign because of the shareholders. She resigned because she believed she no longer deserved a future with you. The apartment fell silent. Adrian looked down at the photograph in one hand and the letter in the other. For the first time in 3 years, he cried, not because he had lost the woman he loved, but because he finally realized she had been grieving that same loss every single day beside him. The city hadn't seen Vivienne Ashford in nearly 2 weeks. The woman whose face had once appeared on every business magazine had simply disappeared. No interviews, no public appearances, no statements. It was as though the Iron Queen had vanished overnight. Adrian stood alone inside the small office of Project Phoenix. Vivienne's letter rested on his desk. He had read it so many times. The paper had begun to crease along the folds. Every sentence hurt more than the last. Not because she had lied, but because he finally understood why. He looked toward the whiteboard. Phoenix, the company he had built to escape her. Now it only reminded him of her. Daniel quietly entered the room carrying 2 coffees. "You've been staring at that letter for 3 hours." Adrian smiled weakly. "I know." Daniel placed a cup beside him. "So, what are you going to do?" Adrian remained silent. After a long pause, he finally spoke. "I spent 3 years convincing myself she stopped loving me." He looked down at the letter. But loving someone and hurting someone turned out to be the same decision for her. Daniel nodded. "So go find her." Adrian slowly shook his head. "No." Daniel frowned. "No. If I go because I feel sorry for her, I'll insult everything she sacrificed." He stood, walked toward the window. "I need to know one thing." Daniel waited. "Does she still want me? Now that she has nothing left?" Across the city, Vivienne stood alone beside the university lake. 3 years had changed the skyline. New buildings surrounded the campus. New students filled the pathways. Only one thing remained exactly the same. The old wooden bench. Its paint had faded even more. One leg still leaned slightly to one side. She gently brushed the dust from the seat before sitting down. A small smile crossed her face. "So, you survived longer than we did." She laughed quietly to herself. The sound carried across the empty lake, then disappeared. She reached into her handbag, removed a small velvet box. Inside was a simple silver ring. Not expensive, not covered in diamonds. It was the ring Adrian had once shown her through a jewelry shop window during university. He had laughed and said, "One day, I'll buy you something just like this." She had smiled and replied, "I don't care what it costs. I only care who gives it to me." 3 years later, he never got the chance. She closed the box, took one last look at the lake, then quietly stood. "It's time to let go." She whispered, "Goodbye, Adrian." She turned to leave. "You're walking away again." Vivienne froze. Slowly, she turned around. Adrian stood several meters behind her, hands in his pockets, breathing heavily, as though he had run the entire way. Neither of them moved. Neither of them spoke. The silence carried everything words never could. Finally, Vivienne smiled. A sad, beautiful smile. "You found me." Adrian nodded. "You kept every promise." She looked confused. "What?" He walked toward the old bench. ran his fingers across the weathered wood. You said you'd never forget this place. Oh, you didn't. Vivienne lowered her eyes. It was the only place that ever felt like home. Another silence. This one softer. Less painful. Vivienne looked at him. I read your resignation letter from Project Phoenix. Adrian blinked. My what? She smiled faintly. You named Daniel as acting CEO this morning. He chuckled. So you really do know everything. She shook her head. Not anymore. I don't own Ashford Global. I don't have investigators. I don't even have an office. She laughed quietly. I'm unemployed. Adrian couldn't help smiling. The country's first unemployed billionaire. I sold most of it. She answered. His smile faded. What? I sold my personal shares. Paid every shareholder who lost money because of me. I kept enough to live. Nothing more. Adrian stared at her. You gave it all away. She nodded. I spent 3 years trying to buy your future. She looked directly into his eyes. I forgot the only future worth having was the one you chose yourself. She took a slow breath, then reached into her bag, pulled out the same small velvet box. She held it out. Adrian looked confused. I bought this 3 years ago. She smiled through tear-filled eyes. I thought I'd give it to you after fixing everything. I never did. He slowly opened the box. Inside rested the simple silver ring. Nothing extravagant. Nothing worthy of a billionaire. Everything worthy of them. Vivienne gently closed his hand around it. You were right. She whispered. Not everything can be bought. She stepped back. I won't ask you to forgive me. I won't ask you to love me again. And a tear rolled down her cheek. I'll never ask you to marry me again. She smiled one last time. Because this time, I finally understand. Love isn't something you can chase. It has to walk toward you. She turned and began walking away. Adrian looked down at the ring, then at the bench, then at the lake. A memory echoed through his mind. Buildings can move, people shouldn't. He laughed, a real laugh, mixed with tears. Oh, you idiot. He whispered to himself. You've been running from the only person who never stopped loving you. He looked up. Vivienne was already disappearing along the path. He ran, not because he pitied her, not because he felt guilty, but because, for the first time in 3 years, he wasn't running away. He was running toward the future he wanted. Vivienne. She stopped, turned, before she could speak. He gently took the velvet box from her hands, removed the ring, then smiled. You asked me the wrong question. She looked at him through tear-filled eyes. What? He slipped the ring onto her finger, then said the words that completed their story. You asked me to marry you. He smiled. You should have asked if I'd spend the rest of my life choosing you. Vivienne's tears finally fell freely. So, Adrian continued. I'll answer the question you never asked. He took both of her hands, looked into the eyes of the woman he had loved, lost, and found again. Oh, yes. She threw her arms around him, holding him as though the world might steal him again. This time, he held her just as tightly. Neither of them said another word. They didn't need to, because after everything they had survived, silence finally meant peace. Months later, Project Phoenix officially launched. Its first office overlooked a quiet lake. Inside the entrance, mounted on the wall, was a simple wooden plaque. Not the company logo, not an award, just a single sentence. The best future isn't the one someone builds for you, it's the one two people choose to build together. And every morning, before entering the office, Adrian and Vivienne sat for 5 quiet minutes on the old wooden bench, just to remind themselves that the most valuable thing they had ever owned was never money. It was the second chance they chose. Together, sometimes the greatest mistake in love isn't falling apart. It's believing the other person stopped loving you without ever knowing the truth. Real love isn't about who has more power, more money, or more success. It's about choosing each other again and again, even after life gives you every reason not to. If you were Adrian, would you have forgiven Vivienne after discovering the truth, or was 3 years of heartbreak too much to forgive? Tell us your answer in the comments. We'd love to hear your perspective.